now.
Cool. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to the first GitLab CI/CD coffee chat, I think is what we were calling it. Like I said earlier, I've been looking forward to this and just having an open chat with anything that all of you want to talk about. I love to meet the people who are using GitLab CI/CD. I've been here for, did I say my name? My name is Jason Yavorska, and I'm the director for product CI/CD product here at GitLab. And I've been here for 2 years and working on CI/CD the whole time. And before that, I spent all of my career going back to, like I was saying, to the early 2000s in CI/CD, building CI systems initially and doing a little bit of release management and other things that are all sort of in that same CI/CD space. Yeah, I'm really, really enjoying getting to deliver the GitLab product and iterate in features with y'all, and looking forward to our first actual live chat that we'll have with a little group here. Michael?
Yeah, my name is Michael Friedrich. It's a German name. I'm actually from Austria. I moved to Germany around about 7 years ago, following my passion for open source monitoring and development. And I kind of touched base with GitLab and Git, I would say like 4 years ago or something like that. And since I consider life as an adventure and I wanted to do more, I found the opportunity to join GitLab 3 months ago. So I'm basically working in the middle of marketing and development as a developer evangelist. I'm trying to engage with everyone, share tips, help, provide talks, how-tos, try to like contribute to open source as well. And I also want to learn about how others are using CI/CD in their workflows, what are the use cases, what are the problems, so which problem is aiming to be solved, and where some things could be maybe adopted or improved upon. And I'm looking forward to join the conversation. Do we want to do a little introduction round, because we don't have so many guests now?
Yeah, I would say anybody who wants to introduce yourself, go ahead and take a turn doing it. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, this video will get live streamed. That's also totally fine. If you don't want to speak and you don't want to read your question out loud, just put it in the doc and we'll read it for you. But otherwise, yeah, anybody feel free to jump in and introduce yourself.
All right. Hi, guys. My name is Fred. I'm from Belgium. I've been using GitLab CI/CD for, I think, about a year now, and we're transferring from Jenkins at our company to get it more integrated. I'm liking it very much, and I'm trying to get more of the colleagues of mine at the company to get more introduced to the whole concept of continuous integration. Mostly, for most of our products, we use it for continuous deployment, or just the ease of deployment. It's a lot better than just going online on a server and copy pasting files on it. So, and mostly I use it for mobile projects like Android and iOS apps, also cross-platform. And I'm starting to like grow the pipelines out to kind of automate everything that if I should be doing something like 3 times in a row, I want to get it automated. I don't want to do it again. So yeah, looking forward to hear about other people's questions. I don't have one immediately, but I might check out.
Cool, nice to meet you.
I can jump in. Hi guys, my name's Thomas Scully. I'm a site reliability engineer for a small software consulting company out in Kansas City, Missouri. We've been using GitLab and some other solutions to just mainly automate the job of deploying away. So we want to make things as easy as we can for our developers. So when they push the code, it goes where we're expecting it to, and there's no human error, there's no toil, no mistakes in it. So yeah, I'm curious to hear other questions too, and just to kind of figure out how other people are using it, and to kind of further learn and I guess help evolve best practices around it.
Cool. Anyone else want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dan. I work for a small company out in Rhode Island in the US, and we've been using GitLab for, I want to say, 3 years now, starting off with just helping us out with source control. And we moved, trying to get our CI game going about 6 to 8 months ago, maybe. So it's really similar to Thomas. It's just trying to get the hang of it and see how other people are doing it, and see how we can make things easier for getting deployed.
Cool. Would be happy to help with that.
Hi, can you guys hear me? This is Igor.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Igor. I'm the principal DevOps engineering lead from Bank of New York Mellon, BNY Mellon, based in New York City. And we recently started our CI/CD DevOps journey with GitLab. I'm currently leading a team for the bank that is upgrading our CI/CD toolchain from legacy Jenkins to GitLab CI. And we endeavor to use GitLab CI as our tool for both continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment to production. Currently targeting in the first iteration our internal cloud platform built on Docker called App Engine, and eventually targeting external cloud like AWS and Microsoft Azure. So we're in the process of doing that right now. I guess the question would be for me, for others who have used GitLab, what has been your success and experience leveraging Kubernetes for container orchestration for your runners with GitLab CI?
Great. I'm sure we'll have some time for that, Igor. Nice to meet you. Anyone else? All right, let's get started then. We'll start with the agenda. If anybody likes, they're welcome to voice their own question here, which would be great if you're comfortable with that. Thomas, would you mind doing the first one here?
Yeah, here, let me pull it up again. Yeah, so the gist of the question is more so our company, we really have heavily leaned into GitLab CI for the continuous deployment side of things. So it's very streamlined to deploy to Amazon ECS, to various Kubernetes offerings from Azure and AWS. I'm curious if anyone on the GitLab side, or if anyone who uses GitLab CI/CD has any recommendations on successful tools that they've integrated CI with for GitLab CI. We currently use SonarQube, which kind of helps us to do code smells, linting, test coverage, various things. I'm just curious if just kind of what other people use. That's kind of the I'd say we have less CI capabilities than we do CD right now. So I'm curious to know what other people are using and have had success with.
I can start a little bit there with what I've seen. So yeah, you're talking about on the CI side, like all the different tools that you can integrate. Yeah, so there's all of the things that kind of come with Auto DevOps, which are also integratable on their own. So static analysis, SonarQube, security scanning, SAST and DAST testing, and code quality are the ones that that we have there. And whether or not you want to use Auto DevOps or not is sort of a separate question. You can at least look at those templates and see, we're using code climate for the code quality that's built in there. And if you want, you could just pull that bit out and integrate it with your pipelines and use code climate in that way. So yeah, that's one bit. Yeah, I'm also curious what everybody's using and linking into GitLab CI for during the pipeline.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Go ahead. Yeah, so we're actually using definitely unit tests on simply every branch. We want to make sure that all these things are tested. We have static analysis tools as well, but mostly they're specific to the type of technology that we're using. To give an idea, I have some for Android and Flutter, but the things that I mostly try to do on stuff that runs on every single commit is to make sure that those things can also run locally, so that developers actually have the chance to check if that works before they actually push it up and somebody gets notified of an error there. So that's just one of the things I think about.
The team that we have here internally at GitLab that does a lot of these sorts of integrations is our testing team. And I was just looking for, so I'll share a link in the chat here to the testing group. And there's a few different categories here. So the link I'm sending you is actually to the place where, I'll also share my screen for a moment. Let's see. Right. So the link I posted in chat takes you here to the testing group, which has all the members of the team, but that's not what I was going for. There's code quality that we integrate with, code testing and coverage, load testing, web performance, usability, and accessibility testing. So you can get all of these, or we have plans to build all of these into the pipelines automatically. But also, you can just look at our direction page, and if you want to integrate these yourself or find out what's out there, like for accessibility testing, for example, you can read the documentation on what we do include and how it works. But you could also look at our direction page and see where we're headed. And here you'll often find like different tools and things that we're talking about integrating. It'll tend to have more of a focus on open source stuff because that's what we can integrate with and that's what we want to support. But there's like this A11Y tool that we integrated with. You can also look at the backlog, which is here under the issue list. And then you can often find in here like different tools that we're looking at integrating. And if you wanted us to do that, then you could let us know in this place. If you sort by popularity, as I do by default, then you can often see interesting integrations. You could also just try searching for integrate here and see what comes up. And it can be helpful depending on the category. This one, I think we've integrated with the main tool that's out there in the market. But maybe if we go to like performance testing category or something, we'll see something in there that would demonstrate this better. So documentation, or sorry, not documentation, but direction. And then issue list. This is a good set of pages to be familiar with in general. I'll loop back around and show you the overall direction page for the ops section in a moment. But yeah, I guess there isn't anything in here anymore. It's because we've delivered, I haven't looked at the testing category for a while, and we've delivered a bunch of this stuff, but there used to be like another tool for doing testing in here, performance testing against your product. But the root direction page that I wanted to show you is about gitlab.com direction ops. And this is there's a category, there's a section direction for dev, there's a section direction for ops, manage, and then for secure, which covers these two down here at the bottom. But this covers the CI, CD, also monitoring Kubernetes configuration and release strategy. And there's a section overview here. There's a ton of things about where we're headed next. But if you're interested, you can drill down, and verify is our stage that maps to CI. Package is our package and container registry. Release is CD, and also release management. Configure is Kubernetes, and infrastructure is code. Monitor is post-deployment monitoring. And each of these has, you know, all these different categories and groups and things that if you're interested in, you can go see what's coming up next for any of them. And we can talk about any of that stuff too today.
Would you mind just clarifying, is that a product offering, like a platform as a service that comes with a certain level of GitLab? Or are those sort of all separate pieces?
On the direction page there, the direction page is where we're headed with the whole product. It's not really broken out by product tier or anything like that. And those features don't exist yet. If they're on the direction page, it's stuff that we're planning on building. The documentation link from the category page would take you to the, you know, the what's out there today that you can play with.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I've put the ops direction in chat as well, that you can get to all of those pages from. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. In terms of just kind of like very broadly in the world of this testing, I saw that there was some Microsoft AI bot that submitted a MR to curl that got merged, the open source project curl. So there was some kind of AI bot that was doing analysis of security issues, I think. And the bot itself created the pull request on GitHub and assigned it to the right people, and then a human reviewed it and merged it. And that was the first time that that ever happened, at least as far as I know. So there's definitely interesting things happening out there and a lot of innovation happening. Accessibility testing is another one where it just seems like there's really cool products, and like the developer console and Firefox now has some stuff in there, and Chrome I know as well, where you can just get a nice analysis automatically of accessibility for your site. That's pretty cool. There's also a related feature, I guess, just to expand on this a little bit, is review apps in GitLab, which is not directly kind of static analysis at build time, but we have a feature called review apps where if you run a pipeline, you can configure it so that for every merge request, it will spin up a test environment that's just for that branch. And then users can go in and see how it's working. We also have a visual testing feature that lets you mark up and annotate what's on that review app, which is kind of cool for early testing as well. If there's no more thoughts on these kinds of tools, then Eric, it would be over to you, or if you prefer, I'd be happy to read your question.
Yeah, I could I'll try to paraphrase mine. Probably doesn't make as much sense, but so one of the things that we're doing kind of similar to everybody else is we're migrating a lot of our, we have certain stuff that we're running out of GitLab right now that's handling kind of the internal automation to some of our environments currently. And a lot of our production stuff is still going through something like Jenkins. And one of the challenges that we have, and the reason why it works well in Jenkins, but we kind of struggle moving it over, is that we still have certain parts of our production environments that are single tenant. So that presents some challenges. And then on top of that, we have a mono repo that majority of our core platform is running under that. So one of the challenges that I kind of try to mention here is that GitLab, the YAMLs and how the capabilities that we have available to us are favor inheritance, which I think works really well for majority, 95% of at least what I've been able to set up with this and other tools. But one of the challenges that we're having right now is that if we want to set up, kind of a base rule set or a base description for something, and then utilize that through a monorepo, which is common, right? We might have like a production deploy that does certain stuff with credentials that we want to do, but then we don't want to redundantly copy that in a bunch of spots, so we might extend that. But we also want to be able to put rules on there to say only allow it for this branch or for whatever. The problem that we have is that as that inheritance tree gets basically one layer deep, because we can't merge the rule definitions for this, we can't specify a base rule on there because it'll get overwritten. And so I guess on one hand, I'm wondering, is there some capability that allows us to allow composition of certain aspects of this, so that we could say, if we had a production deploy and then there's something that extends it for one of our services, but that has an additional rule, saying like, if the scope for this is, UI or something, can they merge that? And if that's not the case, what is a common way that someone might be able to solve that?
Yeah, great question. It's something that's been on our mind recently quite a lot as we've been releasing some recent features. So yeah, the problem, you can sort of do composition, but you're right. It all ends up in a single namespace where anybody you can't use the YAML itself to enforce rules about itself because it's just kind of like a document that's merged together. We released recently a feature called child pipelines, and where a pipeline can trigger another GitLab CI YAML within the same repository. And it will run as a separate, it'll run as a separate pipeline that's connected to the first one. So it gets its own namespace. So you can sort of partition the merge in that way, so you can include things at different points and not have to worry about them all making sense together. So that will help to a certain extent. The other thing that we've done is made it so that that child pipeline that gets configured can be generated by a program. So the GitLab CI YAML for that child pipeline can be generated by a program. So you could write something to, and then trigger a pipeline that would run the output of that program. So if you were some people were thinking about things like, well, for us, we have a very complicated build system where we need to run a bunch of rules, and then we just want to emit YAML and have you run it. There was no way to do that before. I don't know if that matches your use case exactly, but that's potentially an out for you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at this point, we're not striving to have a complicated build system, but because we have a single tenant environment and because it's a monorepo, we're trying to simplify as much as possible. And I think that being able to do something dynamic like that certainly would improve it. So I'll definitely check that out.
Sure, and definitely, and there's another feature I was going to mention as well. Two more features I was going to mention as well. There's these ones are not. The first is not out, unfortunately, but one of the things that you touched on was kind of enforcing some rules around it and wanting to be able to do something there. Like I mentioned, one of the challenges that we have is that it's very difficult for a YAML to enforce rules about the merge at some point. It just kind of becomes exponentially complicated when you try and figure out what the merge rules are and things like that. And it can be very fragile and easy to break and hard to implement. So the approach that we're taking now is our compliance team is working on something that will be kind of like a pipeline supervisor. And you'll be able to put the rules that you want to enforce in there. Like, if there's this file changed in the repo and it's going to production, then this other rule must be true. And you'll be able to encode those as rules outside of the pipeline, and it will be enforced externally from the pipeline. So you don't have to worry finally about that merge. Like, yeah, if some developer messes it up and intentionally, probably unlikely, but unintentionally steps over some of the things that are supposed to happen, this other program that's running as a supervisor can see that and cancel the pipeline or send an alert or whatever needs to happen. And that might be useful for you as well. So hopefully some combination of those things, like for a monorepo, it's really, really nice to be able to not just have that big GitLab CI YAML in the root, but to be able to put them put little mini GitLab CI YAMLs in the various locations that go with the projects that are part of your repo. And that will help you achieve that. And that will also simplify the merges so that there's less unintentional mistakes. Because yeah, getting all of those things to build in a single namespace is like, yeah. I empathize with you.
Yeah. All right.
And then the last thing I wanted to mention, just because you're talking about a Jenkins migration, is we recently built a Jenkins wrapper. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at it, but there's something that CloudBees built called the Jenkins file runner, which was intended for like if you want to run a Jenkins instance in Lambda or something like that, where you just kind of want a standalone isolated instance that can spin up, run a pipeline, and then shut itself down at the end. And so we're using that plus the runner, where you can essentially wrap an entire Jenkins instance in a single GitLab job in a pipeline. And we'll spin it up, we'll run it, we'll shut it down. And it's not really meant to be a long-term solution for, well, you know, you can just live in this mode forever. But if you're in the middle of a big Jenkins migration and you've got like, 1,000 legacy projects, some companies have, some companies even have more than that. It can take, half of those, and you can say, well, let's just wrap them. We'll put them on ice for 6 months, and we'll come back once we've really figured out GitLab and moved everything over in the right way for the rest of the things. Now we can come back, and it's not just like an emergency, let's figure out everything in the world at once. And if you're interested in that, it looked like maybe you've even played with it a bit, but we would love to have you try it out and give us feedback on what it's missing or not.
Great. Yeah, I do remember seeing that, and I empathize with right now our challenges with migrating from Jenkins to GitLab is that kind of based on the first questions that I had with that, since it's a mono repo and since it's single tenant, we have situations where we kind of have parameterized deployments at times, and obviously, that doesn't necessarily, for good reasons, probably fit the model that GitLab CI/CD has, whereas Jenkins more of like a task runner. And so I think, once we're able to figure out what's the best approach in order for us to be able to not necessarily have to manually parameterize some of these builds, and we can figure out what it looks like, kind of the GitLab way to do it. I think that it should be it won't necessarily be a one-to-one port from what we have in Jenkins to GitLab. So
yeah, I think that's going to be unless you're running like kind of a very task-oriented deployments, that it's always going to be better and in your interest to learn to do it in the new way. Right. And so this is less meant to, kind of like pick up your Jenkins problems and move them into becoming GitLab problems, but to like just give you some breathing space so that you can focus on a smaller set of problems, maybe a few teams that are super invested. And in the meantime, you at least know you can shut down your, big Jenkins instance because you've got all these little things running in the background in GitLab. And at least, they can still get access to issues and everything else that's in GitLab. But you can solve that problem a bit later.
Cool. Thank you for the suggestions and feedback.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Great. Did anybody else have any comments or thoughts or add-ons to that?
Yes, I wanted to comment. We're actually in the same situation at BNY where we're moving from legacy Jenkins to GitLab CI, right? And I'm fully committed to the new way of moving to the infrastructure as code approach and less of kind of like Jenkins configurations. But we ran into a similar problem. I guess not exactly the same problem to the extent that I understand what we discussed, but the issue of governance, right? And what goes into a lower environment versus what goes into a higher environment, and then eventually to production. And one of the things I've been working closely with and discussing with, I think Sophie and Rab, I believe, was this issue of governance and how do we govern builds and how do we govern pipelines in a large regulated organization like Bank of New York Mellon. And one of the things that we have right now that we've tried is the sort of the mandatory YAML configurations feature, right, where we kind of insert a certain set of steps or rules inside of that YAML, and then that YAML affects all of the pipelines across the instance, right? Which is not a great way of doing it, right? Right, because it's very easy to sort of break everyone's pipeline with something like that, and then
Exactly.
that we are running sort of multi-language pipelines, right? We have runner offerings for all these different stacks and languages: Python, Node, Java, .NET. We have a lot of our code base at the bank is very diverse. So it's not really a solution, right? What's being offered right now is kind of, I guess, always intended to be a placeholder. But I know that you mentioned something in your response related to kind of mandatory steps or configurations, and my understanding is that that's something that's upcoming and something that you guys are cooking up.
That's right.
But I'd like to hear more about that, because for us, before we start doing production deployments with GitLab CI, that is a blocker, right? If we can not assure that certain things are happening in our pipelines across all of our instances, that we can't really allow code to automatically go to production and do real continuous deployment.
Yeah, makes total sense. So that feature that you're describing that you're using is one that we came out with maybe 6 months ago to a year ago. Time kind of flies, but it was sort of meant to solve this problem. But yeah, all the problems that we were just talking about around, the YAML is not really able to validate itself, because whatever you come up with to name the job, then like someone could accidentally or intentionally overwrite it, and it's not really enforceable. Now you can start to think about, okay, well, let's do crazy things like give it a random 64 character name that changes on every pipeline. But now you're starting to go down a path that's just like, that's not what we want GitLab to be, is like that kind of thing. So I shared a link in the chat to our compliance management group, which is the one who's building this feature. Sophie's also super aware of it too, because she's working with several customers who are all excited for this. But yeah, it's really kind of the better solution that we came up with. We actually deprecated the forced includes feature, is what we call it, at least internally. And it's still out there and supported because we have people who are dependent on it to be able to meet their own, regulatory compliance, just like you. But we want to replace that as soon as possible with this better solution that is going to be, the rules engine thing that's externally monitoring the pipelines and alerting and enforcing rules, from another context, and as part of an overall compliance set of rules.
Right. So can I get a quick clarification about that? Because I think you mentioned that in your previous comments. So there's going to be this rules engine, which presumably is a service running in GitLab, right? Mm-hmm. Like all of the others, potentially, like Gitly or and whatever else. And then someone with host level privileges, right, would have the ability to, I guess somehow through some kind of configuration file or linter, would able to modify the rules for the rules engine. Is that what you guys are looking at, or I'm just trying to understand a little bit better how that?
Yeah, that's the rough plan. It's actually being built in the compliance team, so it's a little bit out of my purview, but I've been following it closely because I've been interested. I think the best. I'm sort of looking in the background as folks are chatting, and I'll keep looking until I find it. But if I don't find it, Sophie can get you in touch with the product manager for that area, point you to the issue. And it would be really great actually to get your feedback on, how you'd want that interface to work. I don't think we're not to the point where there's a mock-up of it yet. It's more conceptual. But it is also a top priority for the team to figure that out. It was actually, so at the time we made that forced include features, we were like, so that feature was built within the CI org as a solution for compliance at GitLab. But the realization we had is that we need a team that's focused on compliance, that's thinking about it from a big picture and solving it not just for pipelines, but sort of for issues and for everything. And so that team that's building this feature now was created out of a result of the forced includes feature. So it's their top priority.
Right. So the official name of it, or unofficial name, is Rules Engine, I guess.
No, I don't know. That might just be me.
Yeah.
I will see if I'm actually trying to.
Because I'm looking for something to refer to when I reach out to Sophie and the compliance team and say.
You can the thing that you can say is like, hey Sophie, what's the thing that they're working on in compliance to replace forced includes? She'll know exactly what it is.
But I like
topic.
Rules Engine. That's pretty cool. I hope we keep that.
Yeah. It is kind of like a compliance rules engine, but I don't know if that's what they're calling it. Cool. Anything else that anybody wants to add on to that last question? Then I'll turn it over to Daniel to vocalize your question, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, like I mentioned, we're really green at this, and so what we have set up so far is just a really simple pipeline where we have the traditional build stage, test, and deploy to a development environment at this point. And we're kind of curious how people generally handle the testing phase. Is we're kind of on the fence of how much to do on a commit level. And we do have a blend of unit and end-to-end tests. Our app is a web application we have. So we thought that end-to-end tests would be the best to start with as far as making sure that visually the app was what we wanted it to be. But when we run the full gamut of tests, they take about an hour and a half. So we're working on, that's kind of what we're currently working on is, I think we realize we need to get on the Docker bandwagon here pretty quick to speed that up. So we get, because I believe that's what will enable us to do parallelization on those tests. But that just generally how, as people are deploying their apps, do you kind of on the day-to-day, or like during the day, are you just doing focus on the feature that you're working on, or and then so like that's kind of what we do, is we do a focus set of tests as people commit, and then overnight we're running that like hour and a half, really hammering the system kind of set of tests.
That makes sense. I think that's pretty typical. I think the ideal would be run every test you possibly have that isn't flaky as soon as possible after the commit. But you're going to run into, like, well, now every pipeline takes, 2 hours to run, or you're going to run into, cost of running all of your minutes and all of that stuff. So that there's a balance that you have to find and strike to identify the most likely to fail tests and run those. The most advanced versions of this that I've seen have some technology where they will analyze the dependencies that are in the change, in the files that change, and they will run test suites that are associated specifically with those tests. Now that's quite a journey to get to a feature like that, but if you can, then you're saving money, you're running the most relevant tests, and you're doing it very quickly. We have other companies that are just like, we have more money than time, so we just want to run every test simultaneously on every single pipeline and parallelize it as much as possible, so that it doesn't take very long. It takes 10 minutes, but it's running like 1 million tests across 200 instances during that 10 minutes. But I think, you know, what you described, like running a pipeline in the evening is kind of the classic continuous integration way of doing it. That's like very, very thorough, maybe against an environment that's out there that is more stable. That's totally normal. Another way that you can differentiate things in GitLab is you can run a light set of tests on every commit. But when it's in a merge request, you can say, I want to run like a little bit more due diligence here. I want to bring up a review app. I want to actually test against it. And so as you go from, well, I've just made a branch and I've got some test code in it. It doesn't actually do that much, except maybe it expects you to run it locally. To now I'm in a merge request, then you can put all of the tests there. And that's a pretty good way of doing things. We do a little bit of that ourselves here at GitLab as well.
Good, that's good to know. That's we're a group of 2 or 3 people, so getting kind of some reassurance that we're headed in the right direction is really helpful.
And what about others? I'm curious what others on the call are doing, how they've structured their tests as well. They may have some good advice for you.
Yeah, one of the things that we actually have, we have unit tests that run quite fast, but we also have the integration and end-to-end tests that take a lot longer. And we've actually chosen to just run unit tests always because they go fast enough. But for the integration tests, we chose to do it only when we're about to deploy or make deliverables or something like that. So we're following the GitLab flow, so pushing to like environment-based branches. So before we push out to, let's say, an alpha branch that creates an internal test version, we say like, okay, this is a good moment to actually take the time and run those end-to-end tests as well. But not on like a normal feature or develop branch. And I'm looking currently into something to create like work in progress branches, just like prefixing them with WIP, and to exclude them unit tests from there. So that's actually the other way around.
That's a great one, actually. I forgot about that, but that's yeah. We have seen more and more people doing that, where if you can just kind of skip CI if you set it to WIP, and some people are doing that just because sometimes you're doing a big refactor and all you're going to get is like 50 pipelines in a row that fail because you still want to commit, but you don't want to run. And then you can toggle that, and that can be a big minute saver as well.
That the follow-up question to that was something I'd been struggling with a little bit was controlling pipelines running in regards to, so like I said, we're not using Docker yet. We're using the shell executor, so it's going on to a pre-built system, and our build stage is just kind of making sure everything in that system is in order, that we haven't made like somebody hasn't gone on, via SSH or something and made some changes. It kind of puts everything back how we're expecting it to be. So we have that consistency each build. And but it was trying to figure out that. So right now we run maybe like with our commit-based tests about 10 minutes, and it was so person A commits and that 10-minute cycle starts off and then 5 minutes into that, second person commits, was getting that second pipeline to stay paused until pipeline A is finished. I thought I had it at first, but I think it just ended up being that that when the runner had no jobs, that it picked it up really quick, and then when there was a job in progress, there was like a 2 or 3 minute delay is all it ended up being. And so I could have, because I'm not using a container yet, it goes onto the same system, and then so like setup stuff we have where we're like resets, you know, like we go to test a specific user in a specific sequence as it walks through our web app. You know, that user's account gets reset, and then so that basically both pipelines end up failing.
Yeah, exactly. I linked to something in the chat. I'll add it to the agenda as well, where we recently released a feature called resource groups, where you can say, you know, this job or this pipeline should only be allowed to run one at a time. You can set up concurrency in the runner, and we have Darren, who's the product manager for the runner, on the call, and maybe he can correct me if I say anything wrong. But there is configuration inside of the runner where it can say, you can say, I only want to run one thing at a time. But I do think there's some edge cases where, yeah, it will pick up two jobs if they start around the same time. Using resource groups, you can enforce that only one can run at a time, and they will just queue up but beside each other. I don't think that it will interleave them. Like if they both have 5 jobs, I don't think it will try to do one, then 2, then 2, then 3, then 3. You might have to double check that or play around with it. But that's what that resource group feature was meant to solve. The one we were thinking of more so was like if you've got a physical test environment of some kind, if you're doing something with like a lathe or something like that, and it needs to run a test and it's like an actual physical piece of hardware, you could say any job that wants to use that lathe needs to run one at a time. And if 2 run at once, it's going to break the lathe or just break things. And so it was meant to solve kind of the problem that you're running into. So check that out. Feel free to reach out to me if you find some gap in it. Maybe we can expand it, or maybe we can find something else. But that's a pretty nice blog post. Oops, I pasted the wrong link here. On one screen, I'm on a Linux machine, and the other, I'm on a Mac, so I have to keep switching between like Command C and Control C, and it's driving me crazy. But yeah, so the correct link is the one that I just pasted in the chat and the doc, and I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
And then my last question was ideas for, it sounded like a handful of folks had a mono repo set up. So ours is somewhat where we have our core product, and then we have client customizations in there as well. And it sounded like the recent, the last few weeks of trying to take a look at the child pipelines, and that looks like that may help us. So when we make an update to our core product, we can trigger child pipelines to pull in our customized instances of it through those, triggering those child pipelines to build our customized systems on top of it would be the way to go there.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback. You said you're just a few people, so as long as you can, I would say avoid the complexity of separating things out. But if you're feeling like, oh, we're bumping up into namespace problems where all of these projects want a job called build, but we're having to name them silly things because you can't have multiple jobs with the same name build, then that's the moment where you should where child pipelines is really going to help you out.
Okay, I get you.
Mm-hmm. But it's fun to play with too. I use it on a small project, but it's just one more thing if you don't need it.
Yeah, that's been our overall goal with this. We're looking at just other things, and just with the small team trying to avoid the knowledge of having multiple tools. So that's what we like about GitLab, is learning a tool versus spread across various things, and just having to have that knowledge base.
True. Yeah. We're trying to make this a little bit easier, but even within GitLab, I would say learn only the features you need. Try to keep things as simple as you can, which is hard because you sort of need to know all of the features to know which are the ones that you need. But as much as you can, avoid just using everything for the sake of using everything. GitLab CI has been around for a long time, and there's a ton of features in there to support all kinds of different workflows, but it can become quite complex if you let it. And keeping things simple is always important as best you can. We're trying to come out with more features to make that easier and easier. A good one that we've got coming up is we're going to make the linter a little easier to use. So it runs, so you get the output of the linter on every pipeline you run, and then we're also going to add warnings to the linter. Things like, I don't know if anybody's used the rules keyword, but it's a little confusing to set up and a lot confusing to set up in some cases. And so we'll add some linter rules that give you warnings if we see something in there that looks like if it was maybe unintentional. And that will just appear on every pipeline in the same place where you'd see, like when you try to start a pipeline, if there's an error, it will show in that little red bar where what the error was. Now there'll just be warnings in there as well that you can look at, and hope that helps get things up and running a little bit easier. We can add deprecations in there. We can add anything, any tips that we want to give that seem relevant to your GitLab CI YAML. And that should help a little bit too.
Yeah, I think I've also seen something which adds to the web IDE for live editing the YAML configuration, and to actually get some like suggestions on what to type next. So sometimes it works, but I think that we need some kind of like a JSON representation and make some sort of live editing possible. I think that's also on the roadmap for future versions from the web IDE side.
Yeah, the web IDE does try to do autocomplete, but it's basically just like it sees that you used a token somewhere else, and so it will suggest the same token is, but it doesn't understand the GitLab CI YAML. We want to add one that understands what the actual syntax is, and if you start typing like rules, maybe you get a little hover, just like you would in VS Code or another editor that says like, okay, cool, here's the parameters that we're expecting afterwards. This is what it does. And that would make editing a lot easier too, and a lot easier to learn.
Yeah. I just need it to yell at me about my tabs.
Yeah. Yeah. Indents. We've been fighting that battle since like 1964 or something as a species. All right. Igor, it looks like back to you for your next question.
So that is, I think, all I had at the moment. I was also interested ultimately how people are leveraging Kubernetes for their runners. Currently, we have the same setup as some others. We're using the shell executor inside of basically Docker containers. So in this way, we're using pre-configured Docker images that include the shell executor to spin up our runners and connecting them to our GitLab instance that way. But that's obviously not the most efficient way of using it. We were hoping once we have Kubernetes on our GitLab VMs that, and that sort of, it's my understanding that integration comes out of the box, that we will be able to auto scale, right, our pipelines, rather than what we're doing now, where we have a certain number of limited containers. Those are the environments available. That's how much memory we have. That's how much compute we have, which, as you can imagine, doesn't scale very well for a very large organization where you might have hundreds of pipelines executing simultaneously, right? And it's my understanding that in the shell runners, based on some kind of Linux base image, in our case, Red Hat 7, right? It can accommodate only one process at a time, right? One runner can run a single pipeline, a single job at a time. So then,
or you have the problem we were talking about earlier where they stomp on each other because they're using the same, they're essentially just running as a user as on the Linux host. So.
Right. And then, and technically, yes, we have different tags, right? For the Python runners, we have different tags. For the Java runners, I have different tags. For the JavaScript node runners, I have different tags. And that's fine, right? But the situation I'm in right now is that I'm running something like 100 JDK Docker containers that are just sort of there running, right? I can't dynamically spin them up or spin them down. I have dozens of JavaScript runners. I have dozens of Python runners. So I'm hoping that Kubernetes solves that problem for me.
It should. The Kubernetes auto-scaling runner is what we use in GitLab.com production for all of the runners that we use, which is an insane amount. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but
Okay,
it works
so
for scaling.
that's a good sign. So if you guys have it running in prod, it should work, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Darren, are you on the call? Maybe you can answer a little bit about how to make the current situation for Igor a little bit more tolerable, or how to get to Kubernetes runners easily.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be an easy answer. I think I shared a quick blog post just in terms of your initial question in regards what other customers have been doing with Kubernetes. Just in kind of hearing you describe your use case, my first thought was, I think what would be super helpful is after this, maybe we set up a meeting with Sophie and you and myself, and we can actually document out your use case. And I don't know if you have a solutions architect assigned, but if not, maybe we'll figure it out. We'll kind of help you come up with a playbook in terms of how to implement Kubernetes.
Yeah, that would be a great idea for us to set up a call. And I'm the solutions architect right now, among other things, I guess. So you would be talking to me about it. But yeah, like that's basically the current use case. And I think from the very kind of high level discussions that we had with Sophie so far, and Rab, is that we need a path to Kubernetes, right, based on what we're doing right now. But we haven't gone into details how we would do that, or how would we, until we get to that point, how do we optimize our current implementation, right, which is just a bunch of shell runners, assuming that it could be done. But the challenge for us is, of course, we are a regulated institution, and we cannot simply start installing Kubernetes on all of our VMs. That's a fight that I'm fighting right now. But I believe that is our way forward. It's just that we need to sort of flush that out a little bit more and understand what we can do with our current implementation, and then how do we transition into Kubernetes.
Okay, I'll ping Sophie, but she probably already has this documented, but really fast, your current implementation, your shell runners, are you running those where, on-premise?
Right, they're basically our App Engine on-prem cloud platform, if you can sort of at a high level, is basically a wrapper around Docker, right? So if you think about our runners, our shell runners, they're basically running in containers. They're running in a Docker container. So there's a Docker image, right? And inside of that Docker image, it's a Red Hat 7 image. And in that Red Hat 7 image, we have all of the layered products required for some environment. Let's say Node, right? So we have Red Hat 7 base image, then we have Node in there, and then we have the binary required for the shell runner. And then we spin up a container, we execute the runner with the required flags. It connects to our internal GitLab instance. So just like in your documentation, following a suggestion of how to connect a shell runner, you give it the URL, you give it the shared token for the host, you spin up the container, and boom, it connects. So, but in reality, what that is, in a sense, without Docker and Docker, or without Docker Engine, that is a static, in essence, it's a static container, right? It's a container that always exists there. It's an environment available for the developers to connect their pipeline with a tag. And it doesn't auto scale, it just stays there. So when you have 10 JDK applications running a pipeline, you need 10 of these runners. Then you need 20, then 100, right? There's no container orchestration piece there, right?
Yeah.
Because
You've got a bunch of capacity built out waiting.
Yep. So I have a set number of CPUs per runner.
Right.
I have set number of memory for that. And of course that makes sense because like your documentation explains, the shell runners aren't really intended for all the stuff that we're using them for, right? They're meant for like OS script automation and stuff, right?
Right, it's a shell, right. And quick question, can you install Kubernetes on this on-premise platform?
I could, I'm working on that. And we can try it, but you know, there is more pieces to just the implementation side. I'm still working on the approval and compliance side. Kubernetes is not necessarily a approved tool, but let's say if I can get KubeAdmin on the VMs and demonstrate that it works, then that gives me a certain amount of leverage to push this forward.
Hey, and stupid question.
Darren, are there non-Kubernetes auto-scaling options for the runner?
Yeah, but right, yeah, there is. But I guess what I'm trying to understand is the on-premise stack, and if the non-Kubernetes auto-scaling solutions that we have, which today is basically based on Docker machine, if those can actually be run on their on-premise stack, it might work, but we'd have to dig into it. But to answer your question very clearly, today it's Docker machine. It's how we auto-scale on, say, AWS or on GCP.
Right. So it sounds like we should definitely have this discussion soon off this meeting. I hate to bore the other attendees with my specific use cases and all the problems I have. So, but now you get the gist of it, and we should definitely set up that call.
Okay, I'll ping Sophie right now then. This sounds super interesting. See what we can do to start with your first problem, optimization.
Great.
Still an interesting question. I don't know who's the next question is. If whoever posted it wants to voice it, that'd be great. Otherwise, I'll do it.
Oh yeah, I just kind of snuck that in there. I was just curious because on one of our solutions, we have a runner that we host on a AWS VM. But I was wondering in terms of like cost savings and with kind of the growth of serverless and being adopted, if there were serverless options for GitLab runners, so we didn't have to necessarily manage a VM and be charged, say, like hourly on AWS when, say, like we only need to actually build and deploy once every, say, couple days or so.
So the question, Darren, I don't think we have them yet, but serverless runners that could run in Lambda.
Serverless so that can run on Lambda. No, we don't have anything that runs directly on Lambda. And this was Thomas speaking. Thomas, are you currently on GitLab.com or are you using a self-managed instance of GitLab? Just quick question.
We're on GitLab.com, I believe.
Okay, so you're on GitLab.com, and you're looking for a serverless runner? And
yeah, serverless, or I guess maybe more so just like a just-in-time runner. So we don't have to necessarily manage a VM just to host our runner on. But when we say we need to build, it would kick up to like start a Lambda, run, build the container, and then once it's done, it would just scrap itself.
And so I would imagine then that the GitLab.com provided shared runners, they don't work in this particular use case for you, right?
I'm trying to remember. I think we ran into issues before where we needed some either custom packages or something installed, and it was saving us a lot of time to have them pre-baked on the VM itself. So I think it worked.
Yeah, so the short answer is, yeah, on GitLab.com today, the shared runners are kind of the pretty standard package, right? And if you needed something that has the ability to connect to AWS Lambda, you're right, that CLI is not installed on the shared runners, and we don't have that offering today. Right off the top of my head, the easiest thing I can think of, I'm actually working through with a customer right now, is unfortunately, today you have to create your own runner, that had the capabilities you need to with the AWS CLI to do all the things you would do with Lambda. So short answer is you don't have anything today hosted on GitLab.com that solves that use case very easily, if you will, elegantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm assuming the shared runners are those like are those, because it seems like those are just like a pool of runners that are just kind of used on demand. I didn't know if those were like a server, or I guess they're not serverless if there's not.
So what those are, and this is where we could probably kind of think through this a little bit. What those are, we spin up for each job that comes in, and we call them share, which is probably not the greatest name in the world, right? Because they're not actually to share. I'm making the picture changes on demand, because each time you use the shared runners on GitLab.com, what we're actually doing in the background is for each job in your pipeline, we're provisioning a brand new virtual machine. And then in that virtual machine, it's then pulling down whatever image you specify. If you don't specify an image in your GitLab CML YAML file, the default image is Ruby. If you specify an image, then it pulls down the image. So theoretically, I guess kind of rethinking this, we could potentially have in your YAML file pull down an image with the AWS CLI, which is kind of what I'm doing right now for customer, and maybe address your use case of, okay, now I need to connect to Lambda. I'm actually working through that right now with a customer, not for serverless deploys, but using co-deploy. So long story short is you have to experiment with the shared runners on GitLab.com, maybe see if you can pull down an image, right, as part of your job, and use the AWS CLI or whatever tools are required to connect to Lambda. And I haven't worked with AWS serverless/Lambda, so I'm a little bit squirrely on how to connect to that. So.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
And it may be that your images were really large, is why you went with dedicated stuff with everything pre-installed. If you're using the shared runners and you've got, like Windows builds of gigabytes of, libraries and things like that, and you're loading those for every job, then it gets to be really slow. And that's when like a shell runner or something like that with a pre-baked environment can be much, much faster. But yeah, the other thing I was going to mention, Michael linked to it in the document, is the custom executor. And it should be possible using the customer executor to write a runner that would run on a single host that could dispatch jobs out to, different Lambda instances that are spun up and spun down as needed. It's not too complicated to do. I wrote a runner custom executor that would use a Commodore 64 emulator to run your GitLab CI YAML if you wrote it in BASIC. And that was kind of fun, but it's essentially
Commodore 64. You're my hero, man. That was my first gaming system.
Nice. I'll link to my my little project. You can check it out now. But it's essentially just kind of like a few entry points for you to customize what the runner does. So the runner itself has a few steps that it does internally that are apart from actually running the thing that you send it. It's like prepare the environment, copy the files to the appropriate location, tear down the environment. And so the custom executor lets you override these with your own scripts, essentially. So like what I did for the Commodore 64 executor was I would start up the emulator, and then I would copy files into the right location and create like a Commodore 64 disk image. And then I would run the program in the emulator, and then I would shut down the emulator at the end. And so you just do essentially those same things, except replace the emulator with Lambda, and you should have something that works. But if the original problem that you were having is that the build environment was very large, well then every time you spin up a Lambda, you're going to have to re-provision that environment. So you'll start having long startup times for your builds, but maybe it's worth it, because then on the other hand, you're not using any capacity for the rest of the time. So
sure. And theoretically, then would it be possible either through a custom executor or some other means to dynamically provision an AWS VM for, like, say with an AMI, we have an AMI with everything we need, and then we spin up that AMI to a VM, and then at the end of the runner, it tears itself down?
Yeah, you can literally implement anything. Like if you work at a company that built your own, virtualization platform, you could make it work with that using the runner. And it's actually not too bad. It's not super easy. You sort of have to know what you're doing in terms of the virtualization platform.
Right.
But the runner part is actually not too complex.
Okay. Sweet. Yeah. Definitely good direction there. I appreciate that. You can go toy around with that a little bit.
Custom executor. I just want to make sure this link. Okay, yeah, the link takes you to the docs for the custom executor. So.
Yeah, I just Googled for AWS Lambda, and I was pointed to the direction docs, and I figured that I might just add it while we are talking. So.
Yeah, you know what might be fun is to record like a, just like a Twitch episode of me writing a custom executor of some kind. But yeah, it's not too bad, and I've linked to the docs there, and that might be a good path for you.
Hey, really fast before we jump off this topic, in terms of the AWS Lambda use case, are you trying to use AWS Lambda to host your runners, or are you just trying to enable the runners to be able to deploy your code to AWS Lambda?
It would be more so to host the runner itself.
So
yeah, so instead of having like a server that, because we kind of have it buffed up with resources, so it builds quickly and does everything it needs. Since that gets expensive over time, if we had a Lambda that we could just kind of on demand, it would just create a Lambda job and build it and deploy it, but then when it's done, it shuts down, and we wouldn't have the kind of overhead cost of having those resources 24/7.
Gotcha. So I completely misunderstood your first question then. So you may want to try the new Fargate runner we just released. So with the Fargate runner or driver released, you can spin up containers or ECS tasks on Fargate instead of having those heavy-duty VMs running all the time. Now, we just released it as an MVC a month or so ago, and because we were lazy, I'm just joking, I hope it's not being recorded. Because it was an MVC, we thought for the pattern, the runner manager, if you will, the brains, we kind of replicated the same pattern that we do today for the Docker machine auto-scaling runner, where you're spinning a VM, i.e. the runner manager is running on a virtual machine. In your use case, that may still be too expensive because you may not want this virtual machine runner manager just hanging out on AWS, right? Burning costs. But theoretically, in a couple of weeks or what have you, actually you can do it on your own, you can actually have the runner manager itself also run as an ECS task to save you the money there. But anyway, net is what this Fargate driver does is with the Fargate driver and the runner, you define your container, your task definitions in ECS, and then it just spins up those tasks when your job comes in.
If nothing else, the runner manager should have to be way less beefy than your build machine.
Yes.
So if you swap your build machine from running all the time to that to running all the time, you can probably save a little there.
And I do have a customer that has a pattern I'm happy to share, where today he is running the runner manager on ECS. This was pre us launching the Fargate stuff. If anyone's interested, I can share that repo at any time. You can see what they're doing to get all that magic to work.
Well, there's 5 minutes left. Does anybody have any last minute topics, war stories, anything you want to share? Anything you're looking forward to, new text, anything?
Guys, I just want to say I really appreciate the talk and all the information. I have to drop a little bit earlier.
Cool, it was great to have you on the call. We'll have to do this again. This was I really, really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I would like to see more of these for sure. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
See you.
Yeah, I might have a quick question actually. So we've been working with GitLab CI quite recently, so we don't know all of it yet. I was wondering if there was some sort of incrementing ID, but specific to a certain project. So not like your pipeline ID, because we have, I don't know, 100 projects, and that one goes up so much. But something that's like could be smaller, like only in the scope of the project. I don't know if something like that is available.
I'm checking off the top of my head. I'm not sure, but we've got this page that has I'll share the link here and in the chat. It's all the predefined variables that exist.
Yeah.
So I was just going to look through here.
I was looking in that one as well, but I couldn't really find it. The reason for this is actually we use CI/CD to deliver our test versions as well, and they get they need to have an incremented ID because of the testing platform that we use.
Yeah, you just need a bigger number every time.
Yeah, the problem it's quite hard for our testers. Like it's confusing once that goes up into the 10,000s or higher.
Yeah, it looks like maybe. Let's see, where was it? I just had one that looked like maybe CI_concurrent_project_ID. I might have to play with it. This was added before I joined, so I don't know exactly why it was added, but it says it's the unique ID of build execution within a single executor and a project. So I don't know how that interplays with Executor, and if you might try running a few builds with that and see, print it out and see what it prints. There might be something else in the docs too if you search just for the name of that variable in the docs, and it might explain.
All right, thanks.
What it's used.
I'll have a look. I'll try it out.
Cool. I hope it helps. Well, I think we're out of time. I want to thank again everybody. Really enjoyed it, went the whole distance here and had a wonderful chat with y'all.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was awesome.
Or good morning, depending on where you are. Bye-bye.